The wind tore across the mesa like a thing alive, screaming through the cracks in the old wooden cabin, rattling loose boards and setting the lanterns to flicker. Rain hit the windows like fists. A storm this brutal hadn't rolled through the Sangre de Cristo foothills in months. But that wasn't what had Eli McCallan on edge. It was the knock. Not thunder, not a falling tree branch, not the occasional crash of shifting shutters. A knock, firm, human, deliberate. He froze, his knife half buried in the leather bridle he'd been repairing by the firelight. For a long moment, only the storm moved. Eli barely breathed. No one came up here. Not in weather like this. Not any more. The knock came again. Harder. Then a voice, muffled by wind and wood, but unmistakably a woman's. "Please, we know you're in there. We need shelter. Just for tonight." He slowly set the bridle down and rose. The fire behind him hissed and popped, casting wild shadows across the walls, but Eli's eyes were already locked on the door. His boots were silent on the old planks, a habit from a life long past. With every step, the weight of old instinct settled deeper in his bones. He hadn't had a visitor in 8 years, not since the day the cavalry came, promising protection and peace, only to leave his wife and daughter in shallow graves behind the barn. After that, he'd put up fences, around his land, around his heart. The war had ended, but his war hadn't. Now someone was at the gate. He reached above the mantel and took down the Winchester rifle that hadn't left its hooks in years. The stock was warm to his grip, like it had been waiting for him. Outside, the voice called again, closer this time. "There are 10 of us. We won't make it through the night out here. There's a baby with us." Eli's gut clenched. His thumb hovered over the safety catch. Everything in him screamed caution. Caution had kept him alive, but something else, something quieter, deeper, whispered from a place long buried. 8 years alone had taught him the sound of desperation. These weren't raiders or bandits. They didn't demand, they pleaded, and no soldier ever knocked that gently. He stepped to the door, rifle still in hand, and pressed his palm to the old oak. Through the thick wood he felt the tremble of the storm, and the tremble of someone on the other side. His heart pounded, part memory, part instinct. A final whisper. "They're coming. If you don't let us in, we'll die. And when they find our bodies here, you'll die too." That was what did it. Not fear, not pity, certainty. They were being hunted, and whoever was after them was close. With a low grunt, Eli slid the iron bar free. It groaned, as if protesting his choice, as if the house itself knew what was about to be invited in. When he opened the door, the wind punched him in the face, soaking his shirt in seconds, and there they were. 10 women huddled beneath sodden cloaks and shawls, their faces streaked with rain and mud and exhaustion. The youngest, barely more than a child, clutched a blanket to her chest. It moved slightly. A baby. The oldest, her grey hair clinging to her cheeks, stood beside a woman whose presence radiated through the storm like a lighthouse in a hurricane. She was tall, angular, a jagged line carved against the darkness. Blood trickled from her temple. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, but her gaze didn't waver. "My name is Nyla," she said in perfect English, though every syllable carried the weight of another tongue. "These are my sisters, daughters, and kin. We've been running for 3 days." Eli said nothing. Words were slow to come these days. And anyway, what could he say? That they'd brought danger to his doorstep? That he'd already buried everyone he ever loved? He looked again at the baby's lips, blue, barely breathing. That was answer enough. "Get inside," he said, stepping back. They filed in without sound, like ghosts made flesh. The cabin, so empty for so long, suddenly felt tight and fragile, like the walls themselves couldn't handle this much life. Nyla entered last. As she passed him, she murmured, "The soldiers who hunt us. They're not far. Maybe an hour. Maybe less. They won't stop until every one of us is dead. Eli shut the door and slid the bar back into place, though they both knew it wouldn't stop a determined man. He turned to face her. "Why?" he asked, voice rough from disuse. Nayla's eyes met his. There was fire in them. But behind the fire, grief. Because we ran instead of dying, because we lived when they told us not to, because one of their officers did something monstrous to my sister, and I swore he would never do it again. Eli didn't ask who. He didn't have to. He'd met enough men in uniform who'd forgotten what it meant to be human. "How many are coming?" 8 to 10. Led by Lieutenant Halvers. Eli's jaw clenched. He moved to the window and peered out. Nothing but shadows and sideways rain. But danger didn't always make noise until it was too late. He turned back toward the fireplace. The women were spreading out, tending wounds, calming the youngest. They weren't helpless. He could see that now. They were survivors. And so was he. "There's a root cellar under the kitchen," he said. "Stone walls, hidden hatch. You can hide there." Nayla shook her head. "If they find us, you die. They'll assume you helped. But if we fight—" "Lady," Eli cut in, voice low. "I've been dead for 8 years. Tonight might be the first time I've had something worth dying for." Something passed between them then. Not trust. Trust would come later. But recognition. 2 ghosts. Meeting in the storm. Outside, thunder rumbled again, but this time it sounded more like hoofbeats, and they were getting closer. Eli didn't sleep. He sat by the fire with the Winchester across his knees, the weight of it unfamiliar after so many years. In the dim, crackling glow, the cabin looked more alive than it had in a decade. Scarves drying on chairs, bandages unrolled across the table, the faint coo of the baby bundled in one woman's shawl. The air smelled of damp wool, rain, and blood. Nayla stood near the window, barely a silhouette against the glass, watching. She hadn't spoken since the last of her women settled in. The others moved quietly, tending wounds, passing blankets, murmuring in their native tongue, a sound Eli hadn't heard since the old days, back when his daughter would sing lullabies she learned from their neighbors down the valley. Those neighbors were gone now. Eli shifted in his chair. "They'll come before sunrise," he said finally, voice low. Nayla didn't turn. "I know. I saw the way you moved earlier. You fought before." She exhaled slowly. "We all have." He looked over the group, young, old, some barely past childhood, yet none of them wept, none shook. They weren't scared. They were waiting, preparing. Nayla finally turned. Her eyes were sharp and dry. "You think we came here by chance?" Eli tilted his head. "We knew who you were," she said. "Eli McCallan, railroad blaster, Union Army, 4th Division. You disappeared after the Cerro Blanco massacre." His grip tightened on the rifle. Nayla continued, not unkindly. "A woman in Española told us you might still be alive. A white man who lost everything because he refused to turn away." Eli stared at her. He hadn't heard the name Cerro Blanco in years. He wished he never would again. "I wasn't a hero," he muttered. "You buried your wife and daughter with your own hands." Silence filled the space between them. The fire cracked. Nayla stepped closer, lowering her voice. We didn't come here hoping for a savior. We came hoping for someone who still remembers what it feels like to lose everything." Eli looked at her face, weathered but unbroken. "You don't need saving." "No," she agreed. "We need a place to make our stand." He nodded slowly. "You picked well." They began at once. Eli showed them the root cellar hatch beneath the pantry, a cramped space, walled in stone, originally built for winter storage and hiding from raiders. 2 of the older women reinforced it with beams and stacked crates near the entrance to conceal it. In the main room, They rearranged furniture into barriers. The fireplace would be a last stand. Eli retrieved 2 small crates from beneath a false floor in the barn. His old tools of trade. Dynamite, fuses, wire. He didn't ask how Naylor knew about him. Didn't want to know. All that mattered now was what they could do before the sky lightened. "You ever use one of these?" he asked, handing her a carbine. Naylor checked the chamber without hesitation. "My father taught me before he died." "He died in the village?" Her jaw tensed. "He died protecting children from men who wore the same uniform that's coming here tonight." Eli understood. As the others worked silently, one of the younger women, maybe 16, approached with an old revolver and a handful of loose cartridges. She held them like she wasn't sure they belonged in her hands. Eli crouched next to her, offering a gentle nod. "What's your name?" "Romy," she said softly. "You ever shoot one of these?" She shook her head. "All right." He took the revolver, showed her how to check the cylinder, how to reload, how to brace her stance. Her hands trembled, but she watched every movement. "Just aim steady," he said. "Don't rush, and never point it unless you mean it." Romy nodded, gripping the gun tighter. Back inside, Naylor was unfurling a map on the table, drawn by hand, with charcoal marks showing streams, ridgelines, and the trail into the canyon. "They'll come from the south," she said. "Fast. Halvers favors speed over caution. He believes surprise wins fights." "He's not wrong," Eli replied, studying the terrain. "But that arrogance will slow him down once he sees we're ready." Naylor pointed at a bend in the path near the old well. "We can catch them here. We used to hunt wild dogs in places like this. Narrow, no room to turn, no line of sight." Eli glanced at her. "You're not a school teacher, are you?" Naylor smiled faintly. "Once. Before the burning." That was all she said. By the time the first silver hints of dawn touched the clouds, the ranch was transformed. Not into a fortress, it was too old and fragile for that, but into a trap. The women took positions throughout the cabin and around the barn, hidden behind shadows and slits in the wood. The baby, now wrapped in dry cloth, slept in a woven cradle under the table. Eli stood outside just long enough to see the ridgeline, a glint of metal, a flicker of movement. They were coming. He ducked back inside. Naylor looked at him. "We hold here?" "No," Eli said. "Not yet. We let them get close. Let them think they've got us surrounded. Then we make them bleed." She nodded. He could feel it rising inside him, something he hadn't felt since the day his world ended. Not rage, not even purpose. Clarity. If they wanted to silence these women, they'd have to go through him. A voice echoed from the trees beyond the fence line. "This is Lieutenant Halvers of the United States Army. You are harboring fugitives. Surrender them now, and no harm will come to you." Eli stepped to the front window, rifle ready. Naylor joined him, eyes fierce and bright. "I don't think he knows who he's talking to," she said. Eli narrowed his eyes. "Then let's teach him." From outside, hooves thundered. The trap was set, and justice was coming. Halvers came fast, just as Naylor had predicted. The thunder of hooves rolled in over the ridgeline, kicking up sheets of mud and gravel as a dozen cavalrymen emerged through the morning mist. Their coats were slick with rain, rifles held loose across their saddles. They weren't expecting a fight. They expected fear. Eli stayed low behind the window frame, eyes steady on the lead rider. Halvers rode tall in the saddle, clean-shaven, his uniform too polished for this weather. That told Eli everything. A man who stayed clean in a campaign like this had others doing his dirty work. "They're spreading out," Naylor whispered beside him. "4 to the east, 3 toward the barn." He nodded. "Trying to box us in." Naylor gave a faint smile. "Let them." Inside the cabin, the others were positioned as they'd planned. Two women behind the hearth, one in the loft with the rifle Eli had cleaned for the first time in years. Romy, the youngest, knelt behind the dining table, revolver clutched tight in both hands. She looked scared, but her eyes never left the door. Eli checked his rifle, then tapped twice on the wooden sill. A signal. From the back of the house, another knock responded. Good. They were in place. Halvers reined in his horse just outside the fence line, eyes scanning the front of the cabin. He dismounted, slowly, theatrically, and began walking toward the porch. Eli raised his rifle, aimed through the narrow slit between the boards, and waited. Halvers called out, voice smooth and loud. "I'm giving you one chance, McCallan. You're harboring fugitives. Turn them over, and we'll be on our way." Eli didn't answer. Halvers stepped up onto the porch, boots heavy on the wet planks. He wasn't carrying a weapon in hand. He didn't think he'd need one. He reached for the door. Eli fired. The shot shattered the silence, tearing through the wood inches from Halver's head. The lieutenant ducked instinctively and scrambled back, swearing as he dove off the porch. The trap was sprung. From the loft, another shot rang out. One of the riders near the barn crumpled. Screaming erupted as the soldiers scattered, suddenly aware they weren't facing terrified refugees, but defenders who knew how to shoot. Nyla burst from the side door with two of her women flanking the soldiers attempting to circle east. They moved like shadows, blades in hand, moving low through the brush and fence rows. Eli turned from the window and sprinted for the back door. He kicked it open and fired at two soldiers who had just rounded the corner. One fell. The other retreated behind the well, firing wildly. Smoke filled the cabin. Gunpowder and rain mingled into a sour, metallic taste on the tongue. Romy crouched lower behind the table as bullets smashed through the front shutters. "Hold your fire!" Eli shouted. "Make them come in!" The women followed his lead, conserving ammunition. They didn't have enough for a siege. This had to end quickly. Halvers, still out of breath, shouted from the edge of the trees, "Fall back! Form up! Don't rush!" But his men had already seen their brothers drop like stones. The illusion of superiority had cracked. Some hesitated, others didn't. 3 rushed the front porch, thinking they could breach the door. They never made it. Romy's revolver barked twice. One soldier screamed and fell into the mud. The woman in the loft took the second. The third kicked the door, and Eli was there waiting. He yanked it open and slammed the butt of his rifle into the man's jaw. The soldier collapsed, unconscious before he hit the ground. Eli dragged the man inside, grabbed his ammunition belt, and tossed it to Nyla, who caught it without looking. "We're thinning them," she said. "Too slow," Eli muttered. "They'll regroup." A shrill whistle cut through the trees. Halvers again. "Bring up the rest," he yelled. "Flush them out." Nyla stiffened. "There's more?" Eli's face darkened. He wouldn't come with just 10. He brought at least 20, and they were only halfway through. Nyla moved to the front window, breathing hard. "Then we finish it before they surround us." "Agreed," Eli said. "We hit them hard now, or we won't get another shot." Nyla turned to the others. "Fall back to the center. We make our stand here." The women moved quickly, disciplined. They knew this wasn't just survival, it was legacy. Every breath they took was defiance, every bullet a name remembered. Eli lit 2 fuses on the dynamite sticks he'd placed beneath the rain barrels. When the soldiers moved in again, he'd detonate and shatter their flanks. The moments stretched long. Rain thinned to a mist, the storm passing overhead, but the tension rose with every heartbeat. Then came the sound of boots. Rushing. Halvers had ordered the second wave. "Now!" Eli shouted. He fired toward the eastern ridge. Nyla threw open the front door and let out a piercing whistle of her own. The side barrels exploded with a deafening roar, sending splinters, mud, and men flying. Screams erupted, horses bolted. Chaos. The cabin erupted in controlled fire, rifles from the windows, pistols from the door, blades from the shadows. Eli moved like a man decades younger, instincts razor-sharp. Every shot counted, every movement purposeful. He didn't notice the blood on his sleeve until later. It was over in minutes. The smoke cleared. 7 soldiers dead in the mud. 3 captured. The rest fled into the trees. Halvers was gone. Eli scanned the tree line, eyes narrowed. He hadn't seen Halvers fall. That meant the bastard was still out there. Naylor stepped beside him, panting. "He ran," she said. "Like they all do when faced with the truth." Eli's voice was flat. "He'll be back, and not alone." Naylor nodded. "Then we prepare." But before either of them could speak again, a new sound broke through the stillness. Hooves, multiple sets, not rushing, organized. Torchlight flickered along the ridge. More riders, dozens, maybe more. Eli's stomach dropped. Naylor squinted into the distance. "This isn't Halvers," she murmured. "No," Eli said grimly. "It's someone worse." From beyond the trees, a voice boomed with practiced authority. "This is Colonel Marshall Dunning of the United States Army. You are surrounded by 60 men. Lay down your weapons and surrender, or we will burn you out." Naylor's eyes burned. Eli raised his rifle again. "We're just getting started." Colonel Marshall Dunning's voice echoed across the hills like a judge reading a sentence. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried certainty, weight, and the kind of authority that made men obey without question. Naylor's jaw clenched. So he finally shows himself. Eli kept his eyes on the tree line, watching the torches move into formation. The colonel wasn't bluffing. This wasn't a gang of opportunists. It was a full company, well-trained, well-equipped, and probably well-briefed. "They came prepared to finish this," Eli muttered. The women were regrouping in the cabin. The smoke from the earlier skirmish still hung in the air, mixing with the raw stink of sweat and black powder. Romy sat in the corner, her hand wrapped in a bloodied rag, but her eyes were sharp. The baby whimpered once, then quieted as one of the older women rocked it gently. Naylor scanned the room, counting silently, checking who was still alive. 2 women hadn't returned. One had taken a shot to the chest. The other had fallen defending the rear flank. Eli didn't have to ask. He saw it in Naylor's eyes. Loss, measured but burning. No time for grief. Only fire, forward. A soft scuffle came from the pantry. Eli raised his rifle, turning, then froze. A young man stood in the doorway, dripping wet, hands raised halfway, not in surrender but hesitation. His blue uniform hung heavy on his frame. Barely 20, maybe younger. Pale, thin, frightened. Naylor was on him in an instant, blade pressed to his throat. "Who are you?" she demanded. The boy swallowed hard, wide eyes darting from her to Eli. "Jonas Dunning, Lieutenant." Naylor's grip tightened. "Dunning." Eli stepped closer, rifle still up. "You're his son." Jonas nodded, barely. Naylor's blade pricked his skin. "You came through the back. Why?" "I didn't want to be part of this," Jonas said, voice cracking. "My father. He's not what he says he is." Naylor sneered. "You expect us to believe that?" Eli watched the boy. Really looked. Jonas wasn't armed. No sidearm, no pack. His boots were covered in mud, but not from marching, from crawling. He hadn't come with the main force. He'd slipped away. "You knew what he was planning," Eli said. It wasn't a question. Jonas hesitated. "Not everything. I heard bits. My father said it was a sweep, said these women were criminals, horse thieves, raiders. But this..." He looked around the room. The wounded, the baby, the smell of burning. "This isn't justice." Naylor hadn't moved. "Why now? Why sneak into the house of the man your father wants dead?" "Because if I stayed out there, I'd be part of it. And I won't." Eli stepped between them and lowered Nayla's arm. "Let him speak," he said. She gave him a hard look, but pulled the blade back. Jonas let out a breath. "You want to stop your father?" Eli asked. Jonas nodded. "If I speak, if I testify, they'll have to listen." Nayla crossed her arms. "They'll shoot you before you get close to a courtroom." "Maybe," Jonas said, voice steadier now. "But if I die here, no one hears the truth. If I get out, I can tell everyone what my father has done, what Morrison did, what you survived." Eli exchanged a glance with Nayla. "You're his son," she said bitterly. "And still, you think words will undo what men like him build with fire." Jonas met her gaze. "I don't know what words will do, but I know what silence costs." That hit something in Eli, deep. He stepped to the window. The torches had formed a perimeter. They weren't moving yet. "They're waiting," he said. "Not because they're unsure. They're waiting to see if we'll surrender." Nayla joined him. "Or if we'll kill the colonel's son." Jonas flinched. "I'm not worth a war," he said. Nayla's eyes stayed on the torches. "No, but you're worth something else." Eli turned. "What if we used him?" Jonas blinked. "What? Your father's still talking like he has all the leverage," Eli said. "But if he thinks we've got you, alive in this house, it changes everything." Nayla stepped closer, considering. "He'll want to negotiate." "Exactly," Eli said. "And that gives us time." Jonas straightened slightly. "I'll do it. Whatever you need." Nayla studied him again, then nodded once. "Then sit down. Stay out of sight until we tell you otherwise." They set the plan quickly. Nayla would make the announcement, loud enough for the soldiers to hear. Eli would monitor the perimeter and check for flanks. The others would prepare escape routes through the back canyon in case things turned bloody again. An hour passed in tense silence. Then Nayla stepped out onto the porch, wind tugging at her coat. Her voice rang clear and steady. "We have Lieutenant Jonas Dunning, your son. He came here on his own. If you want him back, you come talk." Silence from the ridge. Then the colonel's voice again, quieter this time. "Release the boy, and no one else needs to get hurt." Nayla didn't flinch. "No, there are no terms, only truth. What you've done, what you've allowed, your son will tell it all." Inside, Jonas sat beside the fireplace, staring at the flames. "They'll kill me for this," he said quietly. Eli sat beside him. "They might. Or they might not." Jonas looked up. "And if they don't?" "Then you'd better be ready to speak loud enough for every coward behind a desk to hear you." From outside came a new sound. Not military orders, not boots, horses, galloping hard. Eli stood, heart thudding. Nayla turned, alert. From the ridge came new torches, different uniforms, not Dunnings, not army, marshals, federal. Eli let out a slow breath. "Someone's been watching." Nayla's voice was quiet. "Then maybe we're not alone anymore." The front door creaked open. One of the women who'd been watching the eastern ridge slipped inside. "They've seen the marshals." Colonel's men are standing down, confused, scared. Jonas stood. "Let me go out. Let them see me." Eli hesitated, then nodded. "Go." The door opened again. Jonas stepped into the misty dawn. The boy no one noticed when this began was now the one holding the truth in his hands. Behind him, the women waited. Not hiding, not running, ready. The sun was climbing now, pale and cold, casting long shadows over the soaked hills and bloodied soil. The standoff had stalled. Colonel Dunning hadn't advanced, nor had he retreated. His men, no longer confident, milled near the edge of the tree line, watching the marshals with uneasy eyes. Inside the cabin, the survivors moved like a unit. There was no celebration, only grim readiness. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. Eli stood outside the back door, scanning the terrain beyond the barn. The smell of wet earth filled his lungs. Somewhere behind those trees, he knew, were men still willing to carry out orders, no matter how dirty. The marshals might have interrupted the show, but the players hadn't all left the stage. Behind him, Naylor stepped out quietly. She stood beside him, arms crossed over her chest, her blade sheathed for the first time since dusk. "They won't charge," Eli said. "Not with federal eyes on them." "No," Naylor agreed. "But they'll wait. Pretend to negotiate. Hope we let our guard down." A distant sound rose in the stillness, a baby's cry. Not the one inside. Eli stiffened. His eyes narrowed toward the tree line, where the military wagons were parked just out of sight. Another cry. Small, real. He turned sharply toward Naylor. "That wasn't ours." Naylor's eyes went wide. "They brought a child!" Before Eli could respond, one of the women, Mara, appeared from the side path, soaked from the knees down. "There's a supply cart near the ravine," she said quickly. "I saw a woman, a camp follower maybe. She's got a baby. She's hiding behind a wagon." Naylor's face darkened. "They brought civilians into this?" Eli shook his head. "More likely they dragged them along to cook and clean, told them it was just a routine march." He looked toward the trail leading down past the well. "That cart's right in the middle of where I plan to blow the dam." Naylor turned to him, alarmed. "If that baby's down there—" "I can't do it," he interrupted. "We can't flood the valley." Mara stepped closer. "We'll lose our best chance to end this." Eli didn't argue. He knew it, but he also knew the sound of a baby in fear, knew what it meant to make a choice you had to live with afterward. "I'll go," he said. "Alone. Quiet." Naylor didn't protest. She just pressed her hand to his shoulder for a moment before turning back to recheck the cabin defenses. Eli moved fast through the back trail, sticking close to the rock ledge that lined the slope. He used the terrain, like he always had. Wind at his back, light in front. As he reached the wagon, he slowed. The baby was crying again, softer now. The sound carried over the wet grass. He crept around the side of the cart, crouched low. There she was, a young woman, maybe 19, maybe younger. Mud on her dress, her dark hair pulled tight beneath a fraying bonnet. She held a bundled infant to her chest and rocked, whispering something low and panicked. Her back was to him, but she flinched when he stepped into view. "Easy," he said, hands raised. "Not here to hurt you." The girl looked up, eyes wide and terrified. "Please," she whispered. "She's just a baby. She's not part of this." "Neither are you," Eli said gently. "What's your name?" "Mary Ann," she said. "They said it was just a relocation. They didn't say anything about killing." Eli crouched beside her. "They lied." "They always lie." She held the baby tighter, tears mingling with the rain on her cheeks. "I don't want to die out here." "You won't," Eli said. "But you can't stay here." He glanced toward the trees. 3 soldiers guarded the rear supply zone. Not many, but enough. "You see that grove?" Eli pointed. "When I tell you, you run there. Keep running till you hit the creek. It'll lead you south to the trade post." Mary Ann hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll cover you." She nodded, breath trembling. Eli rose and signaled 2 sharp whistles. From the far hill, 2 figures moved fast. Mara and another woman, closing in low and silent. They took the first guard before he knew they were there. The second reached for his rifle. Too late. Eli stepped in front of Mary Ann as the third raised his weapon. A single shot rang out. Not Eli's. The man dropped, a bullet clean through the chest. From behind the trees, Romy lowered the revolver, hands steady this time. Mary Ann stared. "Who are you people?" Eli didn't answer. He just nodded. "Go!" She clutched the baby and ran. He watched until she disappeared into the trees. Then he turned back toward the cabin. But even before he reached the porch, he knew something was wrong. The air had changed, too still. He stepped inside and saw Naylor standing in the center of the room, blood on her shirt. Two of the women were tending to another sister who lay still near the hearth. "She didn't make it," Naylor said. Eli set his rifle down slowly. "I'm sorry." Naylor wiped her face with the back of her hand. "We knew the cost." He nodded, weary. "What about the baby?" she asked. "Safe," he said. "With her mother." Naylor looked at him for a long time. "You didn't have to do that." "Didn't feel like I had a choice." She smiled, just barely. "That's what makes you different from them." A knock came at the front door. Sharp, loud, measured. Everyone froze. Eli moved toward the window, but Naylor stepped past him. "It's time." He frowned. "Time for what?" She glanced at Jonas, who was still near the fire, pale but resolute. "We tell the truth, loud enough for everyone to hear." Eli nodded. He picked up his rifle again. Outside, the marshals were dismounting. The war might be ending, but the reckoning was just beginning. By the time the sun crested over the hills in full, the blood had dried and the smoke had cleared. What remained was silence. Not the kind that comes before violence, but the kind that follows it, heavy and irreversible. The marshals took control quickly. No shots fired, no resistance. Colonel Dunning's men had seen enough. Most laid down their weapons before the questions even started. Some vanished into the trees, deserting without a word. The colonel himself stood firm as they approached, his face carved from stone. But Eli saw the truth in his eyes, defeat. Jonas stood 10 feet away, flanked by 2 marshals, his coat soaked and muddy, his hands trembling only slightly now. The young lieutenant had spoken clearly about the orders, the lies, the villages razed without provocation. He told them what Morrison did, what Halvers allowed, what his father knew. The marshals wrote every word. Colonel Dunning said nothing until the last sentence was spoken. When the silence came, he turned to his son, gaze like steel. "You could have come to me," he said, voice low. "Handled this as a soldier." Jonas didn't flinch. "I did. I chose the side that still had a soul." No more words were exchanged. The marshals shackled the colonel's wrists, bound his weapons, and led him toward their waiting horses. The same man who had threatened to burn them all down now walked in silence like a prisoner in a funeral procession. Inside the cabin, the wounded were being tended to. Of the original 10 women, 7 remained. 2 had died in the night. One, elderly, with a wound too deep to fix, was unconscious but breathing. Eli had done what he could, but it hadn't been enough. Naylor stood at the center of it all, shoulders squared, expression unreadable. The fire behind her cast long shadows, and her eyes burned with the ache of what had been lost and what had been kept. Eli stepped in, brushing past a marshal at the door. "It's done," he said. Naylor nodded. "For now." "The marshals'll see to it," he offered, though even as he said it, doubt sat heavy in his chest. "They'll do what they can," she replied. "But the world doesn't change just because one man goes to prison." "No," Eli said, "but sometimes it starts there." She didn't respond. He looked around at the cabin, his cabin. The roof was scorched, the shutters splintered, blood still stained the floorboards near the doorway. This place had once been a fortress of silence. Now it was filled with names, memories, voices. It would never be quiet again. "I won't stay here," he said softly. Naila looked at him, surprised. "It's not home anymore," he added. "I don't think it ever was. Not really." She stepped closer. "Then where will you go?" He glanced toward the ridgeline where Mary Ann and her baby had vanished hours earlier. "Denver," he said. "She'll need protection. A woman alone with a child on that road. It's no place for Hope to travel alone." Naila studied him. Her face, so strong all through the night, softened for the first time. "She'll be safer with you." Eli nodded once. "What about you?" "We head north," she said. "There are still pockets of family up there. Kin who slipped away before the worst of it. We'll rebuild. Not here. This land has too much pain in it." "You won't be safe," Naila half smiled. "We've never been safe, but we'll be free." The baby inside the cabin let out a small cry, as if to remind them life still pulsed in the corners of ruin. One of the older women, face wrapped in a scarf, picked the child up gently and hushed it with a song that sounded older than the land beneath them. Eli looked away, blinking back the tiredness. He walked to the porch, boots crunching on broken glass. The wind had softened. The trees, so tense through the storm, now rustled like nothing had happened, as if they didn't bear witness to war. A marshal joined him. Older man, grey around the temples. "You'll be needed for the tribunal," the marshal said. "I'll be there," Eli replied. The marshal looked toward the barn. "The boy did good. Took guts." "Yeah," Eli said, "but guts alone won't fix what's broken." The marshal didn't argue. He just tipped his hat and walked away. Naila stepped out beside Eli once more. She held something in her hand, wrapped in cloth. He recognized it. His daughter's locket. "We found it," she said. "In the back room." He took it, slowly, gently. The metal was worn, but when he opened it, her face smiled up at him, frozen in time. "Thank you," he whispered. Naila didn't answer. She just laid her hand on his arm, solid and strong, then stepped down from the porch. The remaining women were already mounting the horses the marshals had provided. Jonas, now silent and pale again, watched them go. His eyes lingered on Naila longer than he intended. Eli saw it, but said nothing. The women rode north. Eli, a few hours later, rode west. He didn't take much, just his rifle, the locket, and enough food for the trail. He didn't know what waited in Denver. He didn't know if Mary Ann would even make it that far. But she'd have someone watching her trail now, someone who remembered what it meant to lose and chose to protect anyway. Behind him, the cabin shrank into the horizon. Smoke still curled from the chimney, but it no longer signaled warmth. It signaled a reckoning. Years from now, travelers would speak of that night, the night a dozen women and a lonely rancher stood against an army and lived. Some would tell it like legend, others like warning. But those who were there would remember it simply as truth, because sometimes justice wasn't born in courtrooms or behind polished badges. Sometimes it was carved out of fire, forged by blood, and carried on the backs of those who refused to die quiet. And sometimes a man who thought he'd buried the best parts of himself finds they were just waiting for the right storm to bring them back.